So, when I lived in Rwanda, I had what do you call it? I guess a vanity. A vanity meaning there was you can sit down at it. It had a desk with, drawers on the side, and it had a big mirror. And the purpose is to be able to help you when you're getting dressed, doing your hair, and all that other stuff. Um, and this was really significant for me. This was significant for me to have. I'd never had a vanity before, so I never really understood the utility of what their purpose was. Um, but while I was in Rwanda, I went through such a transformation as far as my body was concerned, because in Rwanda is the place that I learned how to run, or to be interested in running, which is funny because that's not, I didn't go to Rwanda to go run at all, even though that part of the world is really known for creating some of the best runners in the world, from places like Kenya and Ethiopia and other places. Um, and got to an opportunity to be able to run in a few international races during the 3 years that I was there, um, where some of these wonderfully trained athletes were able to run. Of course, I was not anywhere near as fast as as they were, but I was there, and to be someone who at one point was 300 pounds, over 300 pounds, um, to someone who could run. I was doing 10Ks. I was doing the smallest race, which were 10Ks. It's a big deal for me. And so in my home, in my apartment, I had this gorgeous apartment. And it had this vanity in it. And I would use it on a day-to-day basis. And I can sit down in the mirror and I could, use it to put on lipstick or fix my hair. That was fine. But I found it more difficult when I had to stand up and actually look at my body in the mirror, um, to be able to look at my body in the mirror, um, just to be able to judge how my body was changing as a result of, um, the running that I was doing. And I got reminded of a memory that I had long forgotten about, didn't even think about. Around when I was 8 years old, I remember my mom standing me in front of the mirror. Um, and I had a young mom. I was about 8 years old, um, standing me in front of the mirror saying, you were getting too fat and you need to lose weight. I have some thoughts about why she bothered to do that, and who she was speaking to in order to think that it was appropriate to tell an 8-year-old that they were too fat and that they needed to lose weight, for a number of reasons. That was absolutely ridiculous, because as an 8-year-old, you're not responsible for what it is that you eat. You when you're an 8-year-old, you eat what's in front of you. So really, if I was getting fat too fast, it was often it was because it was something that they were feeding me. My parents were feeding me, and really, of course, thinking about it some more, I said, you know what? It wasn't that I was getting too fat. I was just simply growing. I was just simply growing, and because my parents didn't have enough money to be able to buy me more clothes, to my young parents, it just made sense to just say, Halona, you're just too fat. You need to be able to lose weight. I've forgiven my parents. It's cool. They were young and silly. However, that doesn't stop the fact that I had spent many, many years overthinking what that statement meant to me growing up, and how that has affected how it is that I look at myself when I look in the mirror. And so I spent many years looking at myself and being, constantly thinking about, how my thighs look. I was always made, my thighs were, people always made fun of my thighs. Your thighs are too big. Look at how big, you can't, okay. I had a friend who would sit there and she would do this to compare the size of her thighs to the size of my thighs. And, I just had thicker thighs. It's just something that, it's just something that is prevalent with the women in my family. Um, and so I was always very, very cognizant or very, I thought a lot about how it is that I looked when I went outside. And even as a teenager, you know, people would tell me, I had someone tell, I had an aunt who was pregnant when I was about 16 years old. And she's getting towards the end part, third, maybe even about like the third trimester of um, of being pregnant. And she said, Halana, it's funny because now I'm not. You don't have to be, or now. She said, now I'm the biggest person in the family, and looked at me and said, ha ha ha, and the whole family, or my parents were there, my sister was there, and they kind of ha ha, and nobody thought that comment was inappropriate. Like, why the hell would you say that to a 16-year-old? And when I look back now, I'm 49 years old now. I look back at pictures of myself, and I really wasn't even that big. Like, I really wasn't that big. I was tall. I'm 5'9" now. And I was about, maybe in high school, about 5'8", maybe 5'7", 5'7", 5'8" when I was in high school. Um, and looking back at those photos, I wasn't big at all. Like I was nowhere near big. My thighs were a little bit thicker, but they were just thicker. Like, but they weren't too much. But as I got older, I put on a lot of weight. I put on a lot of weight, and and of course, people always had comments to be able to say about what I looked like, how big I was, and of course, as I had gotten older, I had gotten married. Should not have been married. It was a stressful marriage. Um, I gained a lot of weight during my marriage, and that was the point when I actually creeped up to about 300 pounds or close to it. And then I got divorced, and then of course, I got into another relationship, and then I gained more weight there. And so for me to be able to go from all of that weight trauma, and being chastised for what I look like, for how big either I actually was or how they thought I was when I was a kid. For me to move from that to being able to do 10Ks and then eventually even a half marathon when I moved to Mexico is really a kind of a big deal, right? And so I didn't really spend a lot of time um, trying to work out my weight with regular doctors. Um, when you're a woman, when you go to the doctor, you generally go to a gynecologist. And because I had issues with my cycles, and later found out that I had issues with fibroids, and the fibroids were much too large, which I think really had a lot to do with the weight that I was gaining. But of course, at that time, you didn't really get a lot of support around, why you were having the fibroids. They just know that you had fibroids. And so in 2009, I wound up getting a fibroid surgery, a myomectomy to be exact, to be able to remove them. Now, the fibroids were so large that they had to do a vertical cut. usually they will do a bikini cut, same like you would do if you were having a baby. But because they were so large, they did it this way. And so, I just have this nasty scar that, they told me you wouldn't be able to see anything. I have this nasty scar on my abdomen, which is a constant reminder of the holy hell that I was put through because of these daggone fibroids. Um, I did the fibroid surgery. It was hell trying to be able to heal from that. And then, of course, 6 months later, I found out that the fibroids were growing back. And I was devastated because, like, how the hell do you put somebody through that kind of holy hell of being cut? It leaves a scar. You can't walk. I remember having heart palpitations after it. You have no energy. You need all sorts of blood transfusions and things after it. You couldn't go to work for 4 weeks. It was just too much. And so after going through all of that, and to find out that your fibroids are going back, it's quite devastating. And so that was how I wound up getting into more. I said there has to be a different way. There has to be a different reason as to why I actually have the fibroids. And that was when I started to look into what I was eating, the relationships that I had. I started learning how to cook from scratch. Um, I went to, farmers markets and things like that. Um, I started paying attention to the work that I was doing and started to ask different questions about the work that I was doing. Do I actually like what I'm doing? Do I want to be here? At the time I was working in education, and I said my dream at the time was to become a community college president. Um, But then I started asking more questions. I was like, is this enough? And I started looking at the people that I worked around with, some of my higher ups. Many of them were just nasty human beings, nasty, nasty, nasty human beings, nasty people with cold hearts. I don't even know why they were working in education. And I said, do I really want to work around these type of people? Is this what I want to dedicate the next 20 to 30 years of my life, working towards? And at the time I was a counselor. I was a student counselor. I enjoyed my work as a student counselor. I was actually quite popular as a student counselor. Um, and I love the work. I just didn't like the people that I was with, and I couldn't see myself doing it for another 20 years. And I said, I want to be doing something that was more creative. I'm putting this is geranium. You can't even see it. It's geranium essential oil. The label is so dark you can't see it, but it's geranium essential oil. I use this to help calm my nerves. But at the time, I was I didn't want to be around the people that I was working with. I wanted to do something more creative, and that was really when I started to learn how to. I got more into my writing. I started to learn about different ways of cooking, different ways of approaching foods in healthy ways. I started to take more classes. I took classes in raw foods, actually got a certificate in raw chefing, raw cooking, preparing raw foods. I took like pasta classes. Um, I took, Ayurvedic cooking classes. I did all sorts of stuff, and I traveled. I was willing to travel to be able to do it, to be able to take the classes. I started collecting cookbooks and reading them cover to cover. Um, so between that and the cooking and the writing, I was just really excited about doing those things and trying to figure out how I was going to be able to combine all of those things into a career. I wasn't really clear on what the career was going to be. Um, but I had to be able to figure out something. Like I was dedicated to the process of being able to figure it out. And so what I did was I would use my lunch time. You have an hour for lunch, which was significant. And by the time lunch came around 12, 1 o'clock, you're ready for a good break. And so I would go and I would take my journal sometimes, and it didn't matter when it was. I was working in Washington, D.C. at the time, and sometimes in the dead of winter, I would go outside with my journal, and I would spend at least 20 to 30 minutes of my lunchtime going outside of the office, um, where I would be by myself with my own thoughts. And I was just kind of able to get into my own thoughts and think about what it is that I was working towards. What am I doing? What is my vision? And I started to write, to be able to journal. People always ask me, how do I start journaling? Um, for me, I think the process of journaling started with learning how to journal by thinking about who I was and what I wanted to be in the future and writing from that space. So if I was, I would entertain the thought of being a famous cookbook writer, right? And so I would imagine what my day of being a cookbook writer was, right? And so I said I, wrote this beautiful cookbook. And it had all of these, wonderful recipes that I developed from going to the farmer's market, and these are the fresh ingredients that I use. And I was really excited about learning how to be able to make my own curry powder. And these are the ingredients that I use for the curry powder, and this is what it smelled like. And I would, take the dry curry powder and I would mix it with oil on a hot pan, and this is what it smelled like. And I would mix it with the vegetables, and then I would add in the meats, and um, I would go into details about what my life actually looked like, um, while doing that. And so people will always ask me, how do you get from one point to another? Now, mind you, this has been a multi-year process. Had I been more clear about what it is that I was doing and where I was going, had I had, a different relationship status, I probably could have gotten to where I am now a lot faster. But I didn't. Life, life sometimes, life sometimes works like that. You know, you want to think that you would get to someplace faster, um, but in looking back, you actually got all of everything that you needed, in your story. And in the end, your story belongs to you and you alone. All of those other things that I looked at the relationships, the weight, the surgery, the jobs that I really had no business being in, I learned things from all of those things. I learned something from all of those things. So, that none of that is ever a waste. None of it is ever a waste of time. Um, let's see. What else did I want to talk about? And so in connecting that to my original memory of my mom sitting me in front of the mirror and telling me that I needed to lose weight, and thinking about what it is that I'm doing now as an athlete, I have actually taken on, in order for me to be able to do the half marathon that I did. When was this? In January 25, I did a half marathon that I was so excited about, because again, coming from a person who was 300 pounds and everybody made fun of her because of how big she was, to be able to actually do a half marathon in her own time is a big deal for me. And so in order for me to do that, I remember sitting down is saying, I am taking on the identity of an athlete. What does an athlete need to do to be able to complete this goal? I didn't have a time really that I wanted to be able to finish it in. I just needed to be able to finish, you know? Um, and so I gave myself a training schedule to be able to do it. And it was still hard as hell. It was still hard as hell. But the point is that I was able to do it. And I continue to do it. Now I've come up against some challenges as far as, trying to figure out how perimenopause is working in my brain and in my body. So I'm reworking something. Some of the things that I used to do don't really work for me anymore, and so I'm trying to figure out how, what's the new plan to be able to get to the next thing, because I want to do another half marathon in 2027. But I also need to be stronger because I'm noticing that, like the muscle that I did used to have, like in my arms and even in my legs, are not as strong anymore. I'm losing muscle tone as I get older, which is a normal occurrence. And so I'm learning that I have to do things like lifting weights. Haven't started lifting weights, but I'll do things like squats. And I even do things with my arms with yeah, like armbands. Well, they're not necessarily armbands, but they're bands that I use mostly for arm exercises and doing core exercises to be able to get myself to a higher level of strength. Um, Trying different things as far as food is concerned, eating more protein, and all sorts of things. And so, in all of that, I've been able to use journaling, and just sort of checking in with myself as a way to be able to figure out where it is that I'm going with my life. And so that was really all I wanted to be able to share today. I wanted to share that story of how I, came from, the trauma of being told that, you're fat at 8 years old. Um, and carrying that memory with me through life and how I sort of turned that into a recurring theme that sort of followed me. And I made decisions about who I am and what it is that I deserved in life based on that core memory. And we all have instances like that we can turn to. And so I use journaling as a way to be able to work myself through that and what it means to me. I take that memory and I think about what does what how has that memory affected my life over a number of years? What were the decisions that I made because of that early trauma? And what does it mean to me now? Now that I have decided um, to have a different identity. I don't want that poor wounded child identity, the 8-year-old who sat in the mirror and who felt bad about her life. I can't carry her with me at 49 years old. She needs to be put to bed, right? And so I use journaling to be able to help me through that. Um, there have been times when I've used other people I actually use my journal to be able to use this in conversations with people like therapists and coaches to be able to support me through the process. But the process of actually journaling, that's something that I can do for myself. And that allows me to have deeper conversations with the people that I'm working with, because I get to process in the way that I need to be able to process. I don't have to sit and wait for other people to tell me how to do it. And so I have a Substack. It's called Wealthy, Wise, and Whole. You can get it at halona.substack.com. I'm actually leaving a link to my Substack in the description box. You can find it there. And what I do is I have essays. I share stories from my life, essays, and things of the things that I have been working on. Um, I didn't say, but I've been traveling since 2018. I've lived in 10 countries since 2018. I'm an American. I'm currently living in Mexico. Um, and I am on my way to creating the creative career that I've always dreamed of. And so Substack is a part of that. So you can go to the Substack and you can look at the essays, read the essays, be inspired by the essays, hopefully. And then I also include journaling prompts, and I really like juicy journaling prompts. I hate these 1 and 2 word journaling prompts that really don't really ask you to think about anything. Um, but much like what we did today here, where I talked about, a core memory that I had, um, and how that has affected me, and what is the meaning that I want to be able to take from that story for myself here on out. Those are the types of questions that I ask in my journaling. And so the journaling section of my Substack is called Discovering Yourself in Midlife, or discovering your. I'm still trying to figure out this: discovering yourself in midlife, or discovering your story in midlife. Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to figure out. And you can go ahead and you can join. It's $5 a month or $30 for the year. And I would love for you to be a subscriber. Yeah, so you can just click on it, check it out, read what's there, and see if you like it, and you can subscribe. So yeah, I think that's all I got for today. That's all I have for today. Let me see. And yeah, so have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.